A hand shot out and grabbed a girl by the wrist. It yanked her forward hard into the middle of a crowded market. She fell. Her knees cracked against the wet stones. She never made a sound. Above her head, a folded note passed from one glove to another. Someone laughed. A limping dog lunged to protect her, and a boot kicked it back into the gutter. The woman who sold her did not look back. She counted her money and walked into the fog. The girl's name was Alina. She was 16. And she had just been sold for £100 to a filthy beggar with coal on his face and rags on his back. But that beggar was not what he seemed. Not even close. What Alina learned about the man who bought her would turn her whole world upside down. Stay with me on this one. Now here's the thing. A girl does not end up on her knees in a market by accident. Somebody put her there. And to understand who, you have to know what Alina had already lost. Her father was Thomas Ashcroft, a good man and a rich one too. He built his money in shipping, and he built his home on the edge of London, a big house with stables and a walled garden. Alina grew up inside those walls. She was happy there. Believe me, she had no idea how fast happy can end. Thomas got sick in the winter, a fever that would not break. And before he died, he did the one thing that would decide everything that came after. He wrote a will. Everything he owned would go to his daughter. Every penny, every stone of that house, held safe for her until she turned 17. But there was a second line in that will, a quiet little line that poisoned the whole thing. If Alina died before her 17th birthday, or if she simply vanished and could not be found, then all of it passed to his wife. His wife. That is the part that matters, because 2 years before he died, Thomas Ashcroft had married again. A woman named Prudence Vane. Prudence was beautiful in the way a knife is beautiful, sharp and cold and made for one job. She had married a dying man on purpose, and she had waited for him to die the way you wait for a kettle to boil. And the day they put Thomas in the ground, she stopped pretending. The staff went first. The cook, the maids, the old groom who had worked the stables for 30 years, gone in a week. Prudence told the neighbors she was economizing. What she was really doing was making sure nobody was left who loved Alina, nobody who might notice things, nobody who might talk. Then she went to work on the girl herself. Alina woke before dawn now. She lit the fires. She hauled the water. She scrubbed the floors of the house that on paper already belonged to her. Prudence made sure she knew it too. "You eat because I allow it," she would say. "You sleep under this roof because I have not yet decided to put you out." And Alina said nothing because saying something cost more than staying quiet. She had one thing left. One. A dog. His name was Barnaby, a scruffy brown mutt with a bad back leg that had followed Alina since she was small, back when the stables were full and her father was alive. Barnaby limped everywhere. He was not much of a guard dog, and he was no beauty at all. But when Alina cried at night on the cold floor of the servants' room, Barnaby pressed his warm side against her back, and that was enough to get her to mourning. Prudence hated that dog. She tried to have him drowned twice. Both times Alina hid him, fed him from her own plate, gave up her own supper so he would not starve. That tells you everything about Alina, really. Even with nothing, she gave. Now here is the part that put the clock on all of it. Alina's 17th birthday was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks. That was all that stood between Alina and the entire Ashcroft fortune. Once she turned 17, the trust would open, and the house and the money would be hers, and there would be nothing Prudence Vane could do about it. The lawyers would see to that. Prudence knew the date better than Alina did. She had it circled. And a woman like Prudence does not sit and watch a fortune walk out the door on a birthday. She schemes. She plans. And somewhere in that cold, sharp head of hers, she had already worked out exactly how to make a girl disappear before the clock ran out. She could not simply kill her. A body raises questions. Constables, doctors, neighbors who count. No, Prudence needed Alina gone in a way that left no proof. Gone in a way she could shrug at. "The ungrateful girl ran off," she would say. "Chased some boy into the city, I expect. Who can say?" And then she would wait for the courts to declare a missing girl as good as dead, and the money would fall into her lap like ripe fruit. That was the plan. And the market at Covent Garden, thick with fog and thieves and men who asked no questions, was where she meant to make it happen. So one gray morning, Prudence woke Alina early, gave her a clean shawl of all things, told her they were going to market together. And Alina, God help her, felt something like hope. She thought maybe, just maybe, the woman was softening. She thought maybe things were about to get better. They were about to get so much worse. The fog at Covent Garden was so thick you could lose a person 3 feet in front of you. That is exactly why Prudence chose it. Carts loomed up out of the white and vanished again. Voices came from nowhere. Cabbages, fish, coal, flowers, all of it swallowed in gray. Prudence walked Alina deep into the worst of it, past the honest stalls, past the flower girls, down to the edge of the market where the beggars sat and the desperate men waited for work that never came. And that is where she stopped, right in front of a man who looked like the bottom of the world. He sat against a wall on a folded sack. His coat was more holes than cloth. Coal dust blackened his hands and half his face. His beard was wild. He smelled, and he did not look up when they came close. Just another broken man in a city full of them. Nobody in that whole market would have looked at him twice. Prudence looked at him. She had been watching him for 2 days, in fact. She had picked him precisely because he seemed to have nothing and to be nobody. A man like that, she reckoned, would take a girl and 100 pounds and never breathe a word. "You," she said to him, "you want to earn a year's wages in a single morning." The beggar lifted his head slowly. His eyes, and this is the thing nobody noticed, his eyes were clear and steady and sharp as glass. But Prudence was not looking at his eyes. She was looking at his rags. "I'm listening," he said. His voice was rough, low. Prudence pulled Alina forward by the wrist and shoved her down onto the wet stones in front of him. "This girl," she said, "she's yours. Do what you like with her. Take her out of the city, take her on a ship, take her wherever men like you take girls. I don't care as long as she never comes back. Not ever." She reached into her purse and pulled out a single folded 100-pound note. In 1870, that was more money than that man could earn in 3 years of honest labor. She held it up between 2 gloved fingers. £100, she said. "For you to make her disappear, do we have a bargain?" And that is the moment from the very start of this story. That is the hand, the fall, the note passing glove to hand. Barnaby, who had followed them the whole way through the fog, lunged forward snarling to defend his girl, and Prudence kicked him back into the gutter without even looking down. The beggar took the note. He looked at it. He turned it over once in his black fingers. Then he nodded, slow, and closed his fist around it. "We have a bargain," he said. Prudence smiled. A real smile, the first one Alina had ever seen on her. "She's a hard worker at least," she said, as if selling a horse. "Try not to let her talk. She has opinions." And then she turned on her heel and walked away into the fog, counting nothing, needing to count nothing, because she believed she had just bought herself an entire fortune for the price of 1 banknote. She did not look back. If she had, she might have noticed how carefully that ragged beggar was watching her go. She might have wondered why a starving man studied her face like he was memorizing it for later. But she did not look back. That was her first mistake. It would not be her last. Alina knelt on the cold stones and shook, not crying, past crying, just shaking the way you do when the world has finally done the worst thing you were afraid of. The beggar did not grab her. He did not drag her up. He just sat there, quiet, watching her the way you watch something you are trying to understand. Barnaby limped back out of the gutter, growling low, and put himself between Alina and the man, ready to fight. A half-starved dog with a bad leg, ready to die for the only person who had ever loved him. And here is the moment that changed everything. The beggar reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a heel of bread. Old, hard bread, but bread. He held it out to Alina. "Eat," he said gently. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." Alina took it. Her hands were still shaking. And what did she do with that bread, the first food she had been offered freely in months? She broke it in half. And she gave the bigger half to the dog. She fed Barnaby first, watched him wolf it down. Only then did she eat her own piece, small bites making it last. She did not know the man was watching. She did not know that in that single act, kneeling in the mud, sharing her last crust with a starving mutt before she fed herself, she had just told him everything about who she was. The beggar sat very still, and when he spoke again, his rough voice had gone quiet. "Come with me," he said. "Nobody is going to hurt you. You have my word." He stood, and he did not shuffle like a broken man. He stood tall, straight, and he offered her his blackened hand. Alina stared at it. She had no reason on earth to trust him, but she had nowhere else in the whole world to go, so she took it. He led her out of the market, out of the fog, Barnaby limping at her heels, down quiet streets to a small, clean room above a shop, warm, with a fire already lit and a pot of soup already waiting, as if someone had known they were coming. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Alina felt the shaking stop. She ate real food. Barnaby ate his fill and fell asleep by the fire. The beggar said little, only that she was safe, only that she should rest. Alina sat by that fire with a full stomach and a warm dog and a stranger who had asked her for nothing, and she thought, against all sense, that maybe the worst was finally behind her. Maybe she had been sold into something kinder than what she was sold out of. She let herself breathe. She let herself believe it was over. It was not over. It was just getting started. A fist pounded on the door. 3 hard blows that rattled the frame and jerked Alina out of her chair. Barnaby was on his feet in an instant, barking, hackles up. A voice barked back through the wood, loud and official. "Open in the name of the law. We're looking for a girl, Alina Ashcroft, wanted for theft." Wanted for theft, and just like that, everything changed. This was no longer a story about a cruel woman selling a girl. This was something with the weight of the whole city behind it, because Prudence Vane had been busy. The very same morning she sold Alina, she had gone straight to the magistrate and sworn out a complaint. Her stepdaughter, she said, had stolen her late husband's silver and jewels and fled into the night. A thief, a runaway, a criminal. Do you see what she did? It was clever and it was evil. If Alina was a wanted criminal, then when Alina vanished, nobody would search for a lost girl. They would search for a fugitive, and when they never found her, they would simply close the book. A runaway thief gone to ground. Case shut. And 3 weeks later, when the birthday came and went with no Alina to claim it, the fortune would slide quietly into Prudence's hands, all perfectly legal, all perfectly clean. She had not just sold Alina, she had erased her, turned her from an heiress into a hunted criminal with a few sworn lies. And now the law itself was pounding on the door to finish the job for her. Alina's face went white. "I never took anything," she whispered. "I swear it, I never." The beggar held up one black hand. "I know," he said, calm, strange how calm. The pounding came again. "Last warning, open this door. And now, if you are still with me, this is where you should hit that subscribe button. Because what this ragged beggar did next is the reason I wanted to tell you this story in the first place." He walked to the door. He did not hide Alina. He did not run. He simply opened it and stood there in his rags and his cold dust before 2 constables who looked ready to drag a girl to a cell. "There she is," one of them said, pointing past him. "Step aside, you filth." The beggar did not step aside. Instead, he reached up and dragged his sleeve across his face, wiping away the coal, the grime, the dirt of the streets. And underneath it was a face the older constable clearly knew, because the man went pale as milk in the space of a breath. "There has been a false accusation made," the beggar said, and his voice was not rough anymore. It was clear and hard and used to being obeyed. "The girl is under my protection. You will take no one from this room." The younger constable puffed up. "And who in blazes are you to tell us?" "My name," the man said quietly, "is Sebastian Thorne. I am the Duke of Wexley." The room went dead silent. Even Barnaby stopped barking. The Duke of Wexley. Everyone in London knew that name. The richest peer in the South. A man who sat with the Prime Minister. A man whose word could open any door or slam it shut forever. And he was standing in a rented room above a shop in a beggar's rags, telling two constables to stand down. Here is what nobody in that market had known. For months, the Duke had been walking the poorest districts of London in disguise. He was tired of being lied to. Tired of the men who came to his estate with clean hands and sad stories, begging his charity, only to spend it on drink and lies. So he did something no man of his rank ever did. He put on rags, blacked his face, and went to live among the poor, to see with his own eyes who truly suffered and who truly deserved help. He wanted to find, just once, an honest soul in a dishonest city. And on a fog-thick morning at Covent Garden, an honest soul had been shoved into the mud right in front of him and sold for £100. The older constable found his voice, and it shook. "Your Grace, we had no idea. We only acted on a sworn complaint from a Mrs. Prudence Vane." "I am aware of exactly what Mrs. Vane has sworn," the Duke said, "and I intend to deal with it personally. You will return to your magistrate and you will tell him the charge against this girl is withdrawn, pending my own inquiry. If a single hand is laid upon her, that man will answer to me. Do I make myself understood?" "Yes, Your Grace, perfectly, Your Grace." They could not back out of that room fast enough. The door closed. Eleanor stood there staring at the man she had thought was the lowest beggar in London, now revealed as the highest man in the county. Her mouth opened and nothing came out. "You," she managed, "you are." "I am the man your stepmother sold you to," Sebastian said, and something almost like a smile touched his mouth. "She thought she was handing you to a nobody who would carry you off and lose you forever. Instead, she handed you to the one man in London with the power to give you everything back." He shook his head slowly. "I have watched a great deal of cruelty in these last months, Eleanor. I have watched people lie to my face for a coin, but I have never watched anyone do what you did in that market." "What did I do?" she whispered. She truly did not know. "You were starving," he said, "and you gave your bread to a dog before you fed yourself." He looked at Barnaby, who thumped his tail against the floor. "A person who does that when she has nothing is a person who can be trusted with everything. Your stepmother thought she knew what she was selling. She had no idea what you were worth." Eleanor sat down hard, because her legs would not hold her. And Sebastian Thorne pulled up a chair across from her and told her the truth of it, that her father's will was not lost, that the estate was still hers, that Prudence's scheme depended entirely on Eleanor staying vanished and voiceless, and that Eleanor was neither of those things anymore. "There are 3 weeks until your birthday," he said. 3 weeks until everything your father left is legally, finally yours, and no lie your stepmother tells can touch it. All you have to do is survive those 3 weeks somewhere she cannot reach you." He leaned forward. "There is no safer place in England than Wexley Manor. Will you come?" Eleanor looked at Barnaby. "Him too." "Him too," Sebastian said, "especially him." So she went. And Prudence Vane, back in the Ashcroft house, counted her days and dreamed of her fortune, and had no idea at all, that the girl she had sold like cattle was now sleeping under the roof of the most powerful man in the south of England, being fed, being cared for, and telling him every single detail of what Prudence had done. 3 weeks passed. The birthday came, and on the morning after, a letter arrived at the Ashcroft house, sealed with the crest of the Duke of Wexley. It requested the presence of Mrs. Prudence Vane at Wexley Manor that very afternoon, on a matter concerning the late Thomas Ashcroft's estate. Prudence read it 3 times, and she smiled. Of course, the Duke of Wexley. He must have heard there was an unclaimed fortune with no heir. He must want to discuss purchasing the estate or advising her on it. A woman of property, summoned by a duke. This was everything she had schemed for, arriving with a golden seal. She wore her finest dress. She hired the best carriage she could find, and she rode to Wexley Manor certain she was riding toward the crowning day of her life. She was riding toward the exact opposite. They led her into a great hall with a fire at the far end and portraits watching from the walls. The Duke of Wexley sat in a tall chair, dressed now in the fine dark clothes of his rank, clean, groomed, every inch a peer of the realm. Prudence swept into a deep curtsy. "Your Grace," she purred, "I am so honored, so very honored, you wish to speak with me about the Ashcroft estate." "I did," Sebastian said. "Please." "Sit." She sat, she arranged her skirts. She prepared her sweetest lies. "You have recently come into a great deal of property," the Duke said. "The house, the shipping interests, the accounts, a considerable fortune, and I understand it came to you upon the disappearance of your late husband's daughter." "A tragedy," Prudence said, pressing a hand to her heart. "The poor girl, wild, you understand, ungrateful. She stole from me and ran off into the city. I did everything I could, but some children simply cannot be saved." She dabbed at a dry eye. "The estate passed to me by the terms of the will, quite legally, I assure you." "Quite legally," the Duke repeated. "If the girl were truly gone." "Oh, she is gone," Prudence said. "I am certain of it, quite certain." "Are you?" Sebastian said. And he lifted one hand and gestured toward the far door. It opened, and Eleanor Ashcroft walked into the hall, not the mud-streaked servant Prudence had shoved into the market. This Eleanor wore a fine gown. Her hair was clean and pinned. She stood straight and her eyes were steady, and she walked to the Duke's side and stopped there. And limping at her heels, well-fed and brushed and proud, came a scruffy brown dog with a bad back leg. Prudence Vane made a sound like all the air had been knocked out of her. "You," she breathed, "you are dead. You are supposed to be." "Gone," Eleanor said quietly. "Yes, I know. That was the plan, wasn't it?" Prudence's face went from white to gray. Her eyes darted around the hall, and slowly, horribly, the truth began to arrive. She looked at the Duke. She looked at his hands, his face, and somewhere in that sharp, cold, clever head, she began to recognize the beggar she had sold a girl to in the fog 3 weeks before. "No," she whispered, "no, it cannot." £100, Sebastian said, and he reached into his coat and set that very same folded banknote on the table between them. "You handed me this note, Mrs. Vane, and you told me to make her disappear. You told me to put her on a ship. You kicked her dog into the gutter and you walked away. Do you remember? Because I remember every word." Prudence was on her feet now, backing toward the door. "This is a trick. This is entrapment. No one will believe." "They already do," the Duke said. He gestured, and a man stepped from the shadows at the side of the hall, a thin man with spectacles and a leather case. "This is the magistrate. He has heard everything you have said this afternoon in your own words with your own mouth. The false theft charge you swore against Eleanor, the claim that she ran off when in truth you sold her, the fortune you seized on the strength of lies." He paused. "You built your whole scheme on a girl who could not speak. She can speak now, and so can I." Prudence spun toward the door and found 2 constables filling it. the very ones who had pounded on that rented room 3 weeks before. They did not look sorry to see her. "It is over, Mrs. Vane," Sebastian said, and his voice was iron. "Every account is frozen. The estate returns to its rightful owner this morning as her father intended, and you will answer to the court for fraud, for perjury, and for the sale of a child. You wanted the Ashcroft fortune so badly. You will not see a penny of it. What you will see is the inside of a cell." Prudence Vane looked around that great hall one last time, at the portraits, at the fire, at the girl she had sold standing tall and safe beside a duke, and at the dog she had tried to drown sitting proud at that girl's feet. And she understood, finally, all at once, that she had reached out to grab a fortune and had grabbed her own ruin instead. They took her out in irons. She did not walk to a carriage of her own that day. She rode in a cart. And she did not look back either, because there was nothing left behind her worth looking at. The hall went quiet, the fire cracked, and Alina Ashcroft, 17 years old now and free, let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for a year. The weeks that followed were strange for her in the best way. The Ashcroft house was hers again, every stone of it. The accounts opened. The lawyers bowed and called her Miss Ashcroft and asked her wishes instead of giving her orders. She rehired the old groom who had worked her father's stables and the cook, and she paid them well. The house that had felt like a prison began to feel like a home again. But she did not go back to it alone, and she did not go back to it the same girl. The Duke came to call, often. At first he told himself it was to see the estate settled properly, to make sure no thread of Prudence's scheme remained. But that was not really why he came, and after a while he stopped pretending it was. He came because of a girl who broke her last piece of bread in half in the mud and gave the bigger half to a dog. A man can spend his whole life among rich people and never once meet someone honest. Sebastian Thorne had gone looking through the poorest streets in London for a single soul worth trusting, and he had found her being sold like a sack of coal. He told her that, one evening, sitting by the fire in her father's house with Barnaby asleep between them. "I went into those streets to learn who deserved my charity," he said, "and I never gave a shilling to anyone the whole time. Do you know why?" Alina shook her head. "Because charity was the wrong thing to be looking for. I was not meant to find someone to give money to. I was meant to find you." Alina smiled. She had learned how to smile again. It had taken a while. "I did not need saving, you know," she said. "In the end, once I could speak, I would have one." "I know," Sebastian said. "That is exactly why I could not walk away." Here is the thing about how this story ends. It did not end with a rescue. Rescues are for helpless people, and Alina Ashcroft was never truly helpless, not even on her knees in the fog. What she was unheard. Silenced by a woman who thought a quiet girl was a weak one. And the moment somebody gave her back her voice, she took back everything else herself. They married in the spring. Not because she needed his name or his money, because she had her own now and plenty of it. They married because two honest people in a world full of liars had found each other, and neither one was fool enough to let go. Barnaby lived out his days by the biggest, warmest fire in Wexley Manor, on a cushion the Duke himself had ordered made. He never had to fight for a scrap of food again as long as he lived. The dog that had put himself between Alina and the whole world on a bad leg, asking for nothing, got to grow old, warm and full and loved. He earned every day of it. And Alina, remember how this all began. A hand shooting out to grab a girl by the wrist and throw her down in the mud. That is where her story started, with a hand that took. But it is not where it ended. Because years later, Alina Ashcroft, now the Duchess of Wexley, spent her days walking those same poor districts her husband once walked in disguise. Only she did not go in rags, and she did not go to test anyone. She went with warm bread and full purses, and a plain, hard-earned understanding of what it feels like to have nothing and be worth everything. And whenever she found some ragged soul knocked down in the mud of that market, some girl on her knees that the world had decided not to see, Eleanor did the one thing that had been done for her once on the worst morning of her life. She reached out her hand, and this time, that hand helped someone up.